find a quiet spot and breathe deeply. Let your body relax and your mind soften. Imagine the gentle flow of the Nile, calm, steady, endless. Now, step back in time with me to ancient Egypt, where the river carried life and stories older than the stars. Let the quiet pull you in as we begin this journey together. Long before pyramids rose from the sands, before pharaohs wore golden crowns or scribes inked hieroglyphs onto stone walls, there was only the Nile. The Nile River is not like other rivers. It doesn't just flow, it breathes life into the desert. It winds its way more than 4,000 miles from deep in the heart of Africa, passing through the vast dry lands of Egypt, where rain is rare and shadows are long. Every year, without fail, the river swells and spills over its banks, covering the land with rich, dark silt. The ancient people called this land the Kemet, the Black Land, because of the color of the fertile soil. Farther from the river's edge was the Dishret, or Red Land, the harsh desert of endless sand and sun, dotted with rocky outcrops and hidden secrets. The Nile was everything: water, food, transportation, and the giver of time itself. In the very beginning, as early as 10,000 BCE, the people who would one day be called Egyptians lived in small bands. They hunted antelope and fished in the river. They gathered fruits and herbs. As the climate warmed and the Sahara turned from green to sand, more and more people settled along the Nile. Time passed slowly, like the drift of clouds on a hot day. Families began to farm. They planted barley and emmer wheat, and they learned the rhythm of the river's floods. They wove baskets, shaped clay pots, and watched the stars for signs of the seasons. Slowly, these early Nile settlers moved from tents to mud brick homes. Their dogs barked, their goats grazed, and their children played in the fields. By 600 BCE, small farming villages dotted the floodplain. Each had its own customs, pottery, and tools. They raised cattle and learned to store grain. They buried their dead in shallow graves, wrapped in linen, curled gently on their sides, often with pots or tools to accompany them, a sign that they believed in something beyond this world. These people, our ancestors in the Nile Valley, were peaceful, artistic, and deeply spiritual. They painted patterns on pottery with care and carved ivory figures of women and animals. They believed in unseen spirits, in the soul, in nature, in something greater than themselves. Over time, two major cultures emerged. In the south, around modern-day Aswan and Luxor, was the Naqada culture. In the north, near the delta, smaller cultures began to develop as well. Though separated by distance, they were linked by the river, a moving thread that tied people, ideas, and beliefs together. By 400 BCE, villages began to trade with one another. Boats, simple, curved vessels made of reeds, glided along the Nile, carrying obsidian, incense, and exotic goods. The people of Naqada began crafting more sophisticated tools, jewelry, and even images of gods. Some of their tombs were already lined with stone, a whisper of what was to come. Then came copper tools. The dawn of metal. Hierarchy. Chiefdoms. And the first signs of kingship. As the centuries drifted by, the southern leaders grew in power. One town in particular, called Nekhen, or Hierakonpolis, rose to prominence. Here, archaeologists have found the earliest known painted tomb, scenes of boats, dancers, and rituals from over 5,000 years ago. These early kings wore leopard skins, carried maces, and performed ceremonies in grand open-air courtyards. It was here that a sacred creature was worshipped, the falcon. The god Horus, the sky god, protector of kings, may have first been honored at Nekhen. He would one day become the divine symbol of the pharaoh. By 3200 BCE, this land was no longer a quiet place of scattered villages. The leaders of the south had begun to conquer the north. Trade had expanded. Scribes were inventing the earliest Egyptian hieroglyphs. And the idea of a single ruler, not just a local chief, but a divine king, had begun to take hold. Somewhere in this hazy twilight of prehistory, a man emerged. A man with ambition, vision, and power. His name was Narmer. And with him, the story of ancient Egypt, the story of kingdoms, pyramids, and gods, truly begins. The sky over the Nile was still and vast. The river, like a silver ribbon, curled gently through the land. In the south, the rulers of Nekhen watched the stars and sharpened their spears. In the north, the villages of the delta flourished among papyrus reeds and fertile fields. But tension stirred like wind over tall grass. Two lands. Two peoples. And soon, only one crown. This was the pre-dynastic period, a time when Egypt was not yet Egypt. The land was divided into Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north. They were not called Upper and Lower because of direction, but because the Nile flows from the highlands in the south to the lowlands in the north. Upper Egypt was ruled by warrior kings. They wore tall white crowns and worshipped Horus the falcon god. Lower Egypt was green and rich, its rulers wearing red crowns, honoring the cobra goddess Wadjet. The two lands had separate gods, rulers, customs, but they shared one river. And soon, one destiny. Around 3100 BCE, a powerful figure stepped forward from the mists of legend, Narmer, the king of Upper Egypt. He was more than a man. To his people, he was chosen by the gods, born to bring order, Ma'at, to a divided world. We know of Narmer from an extraordinary object, the Narmer palette, carved from smooth green schist and buried in a temple at Hierakonpolis. On one side, Narmer is shown wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, striking down an enemy. On the other, he wears the red crown of Lower Egypt. The two lands, united in a single symbol. One ruler, one crown, one Egypt. Narmer's conquest was not only military. It was symbolic. He merged the two crowns into the skent, the double crown, combining red and white. He declared himself Nswt, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt. He built a capital city near the center of the two lands, a place called Memphis, the balance of the two lands. With this unification, the first dynasty began. Egypt became the world's first great nation-state, a place ruled by law, sacred order, and divine authority. Narmer's successors, including a king named Aha, and possibly Narmer's son, expanded the state. They built grand tombs at Abydos, lined with chambers and goods for the afterlife. They sent expeditions to mine copper in the Sinai, and they established trade routes with Nubia, the Levant, and even far-off lands to the east. As the first dynasty gave way to the second dynasty, Egypt became more centralized. Scribes, using early hieroglyphs, kept detailed records of grain harvests, temple offerings, court decrees, and religious rituals. Craftsmen carved delicate ivory combs and cosmetic palettes. Priests watched the stars and tracked time using the moon and Sirius, the star of the goddess Sopdet. This was a time of quiet power, slow and sacred, like the river itself. Pharaohs were buried with attendants and animals, as if to accompany them to the next world. It was believed that the soul lived on, not only in the tomb but through the rituals, the offerings, and the sacred remembrance of the living. The people built homes of mud brick and plaster. They painted their walls with symbols. They believed in the afterlife as something not far away, but just beyond the horizon. And at the center of everything stood the pharaoh, not just a king, but a living god. The embodiment of Horus in life, and Osiris in death. The idea of rule was sacred. The pharaoh was not chosen by votes or bloodline alone, but by the gods themselves. He, or occasionally she, had a duty, to uphold Ma'at, the cosmic order of harmony and truth. This meant building temples, feeding the poor, waging just wars, and honoring the gods in every action. But something was coming. The pharaohs of the second dynasty began to experiment with power. Some moved their tombs from Abydos to Saqqara. Others built fortified towns. One king, named Kheskemwi, is said to have fought a terrible civil war, and afterward took a new name. The two powers appear. His name combined the symbols of Horus and Seth, two rival gods, showing that he had unified Egypt again. This marked a turning point. From this balance of chaos and order, war and peace, a new age would rise, one of sunlight, limestone, and miracles of engineering. The Old Kingdom. But for now, the sun sets softly on the land of Narmer. The reeds sway gently in the Nile breeze. And the dreams of pyramids begin to form in the minds of kings yet unborn. Let your thoughts drift, like a bark upon the Nile. The land is whole, the gods are watching, and the world is at peace. The sun rises slowly over the Nile. Its light touches the land with gold, glinting on water and warming the bricks of homes and temples. Children stir in their beds of woven reeds, farmers step quietly into their fields, and the mighty pharaoh sits upon his throne, his face calm, his crown gleaming, his soul filled with the divine order of Ma'at. It is the dawn of the Old Kingdom, a time of greatness and stillness, of faith and architecture, of kings and gods walking side by side. This era begins with the Third Dynasty, around 2686 BCE. A wise and innovative king named Djoser comes to power. He is remembered not only for his rule, but for his friendship with a brilliant man named Imhotep, a priest, physician, scribe, and architect whose name would echo through time. Together, Djoser and Imhotep conceived something entirely new. No more mastabas, those low, flat-roofed tombs of earlier kings. No, this tomb would rise toward the sky, made of stone, layered step by step like a staircase for the soul. And so, on the dry plateau of Saqqara, the first pyramid was built. The Step Pyramid of Djoser. It stood like a dream turned into stone, over 60 meters high, with 6 great steps stacked one atop the other. Beneath it stretched a vast complex, colonnades of limestone, imitation palaces for the spirit of the king, courts, sanctuaries, and chambers. It was not just a tomb, it was a portal to eternity. This pyramid marked the beginning of a tradition that would shape Egypt's soul for centuries. As the Fourth Dynasty dawned, Egypt entered an age of unmatched ambition. Kings now called themselves sons of Ra, the sun god. They built not only tombs, but legacies. The Nile's banks became home to some of the greatest monuments the world would ever know. The pharaoh Sneferu, builder, reformer, and dreamer, began this grand tradition. He built not one, not two, but 3 pyramids. The first, at Midam, collapsed in part. The second, the bent pyramid at Dahshur, changes angle halfway up, a beautiful accident, a symbol of learning. The third, the Red Pyramid, was perfect. Smooth-sided, stable, elegant. The first true pyramid. Then came Sneferu's son, Khufu. To honor his divine role, Khufu chose the desert plateau of Giza, high ground west of the Nile, where the sun sets and the dead are at peace. There, his architects began to raise the most iconic structure in all of history, the Great Pyramid. Built from over 2 million limestone blocks, each carefully placed, the Great Pyramid once stood 146 meters tall, the tallest human-made structure on Earth for over 3,800 years. It was a feat of organization as much as construction. Thousands of skilled laborers, not slaves but seasonal workers and artisans, toiled under the sun. They lived in purpose-built villages, with bakeries, breweries, and clinics. They were fed, honored, and remembered, their names carved into the stone. Inside the pyramid, narrow passages lead to the king's chamber, sealed for eternity. Though looted long ago, the heart of the pyramid remains a marvel of engineering. Its alignment with the stars, its perfect proportions, all were deliberate, symbolic, sacred. Beside Khufu's pyramid stood 2 others, for his son Khafre and his grandson Menkaure. Khafre's pyramid appears taller, as it sits on higher ground, and beside it rests the Great Sphinx, a colossal guardian with a lion's body and the face of a king. Carved from a single stone, the Sphinx watches over the necropolis with quiet majesty, its gaze fixed eternally to the east. The pyramid fields of Giza were not isolated tombs. They were cities for the dead, complete with temples, causeways, statues, and sacred rituals. Every night, priests would chant prayers for the soul of the king. Every day, incense would burn and offerings would be made. The Egyptians believed that death was not an end, but a transformation. The king became Osiris, lord of the underworld, and his successor became Horus, protector of the living. This cycle, death and rebirth, was echoed in the sun's daily path across the sky. While the pharaohs built for eternity, everyday life along the Nile moved gently forward. Farmers tended their crops according to the 3 seasons of the Nile. Ake, the flood season, when the river rose. Parate, the growing season, when the waters receded. Shimu, the harvest season, when fields were gathered. They plowed using wooden tools and oxen. Women baked bread and brewed beer, cared for children, and wove linen. Scribes recorded taxes and births, priests performed rituals, and artisans carved and painted the gods in tombs and temples. Society was organized and harmonious. The pharaohs stood at the top, followed by nobles, priests, and scribes. Below them were soldiers, farmers, craftsmen, and laborers. At the bottom were servants and foreign captives, but even they had a place in the grand design. The gods were everywhere. Ra sailed across the sky in a fiery bark by day, and through the underworld at night. Thoth, the ibis-headed god, watched over wisdom and writing. Anubis, the jackal god, guided souls to the afterlife. And Ma'at, with her feather of truth, judged the purity of every heart. Temples rose along the Nile, each a bridge between heaven and earth. The rituals performed within were not for public worship, but cosmic maintenance. Keeping the balance. Nourishing the gods, who in turn nourished the world. The Old Kingdom saw more than just pyramids. Art became idealized, calm, symmetrical, serene. Statues of scribes sat cross-legged, alert and wise. Reliefs showed workers fishing, harvesting, dancing. Even animals were honored, cats, baboons, hippos, each with their sacred role. But even the most golden age can fade. Toward the end of the 6th dynasty, cracks began to appear. Regional governors, called nomarchs, grew in power. Floods failed. Resources thinned. The pharaoh's reach weakened. By 2181 BCE, the central government faltered. The Great Pyramids stood silent. Temples were empty. Tombs went unfinished. A dark time had come. But Egypt would endure. It always did. And as the last sun of the Old Kingdom set behind the dunes, the people looked to the stars and waited, for rebirth, for unity, for the return of Ma'at. Let's gently continue into the shadows, into a quieter, more fragile chapter of Egypt's long dream, a time between glories, when the stars seemed more distant, and the gods, more silent. The Great Pyramid still stood, vast, ancient, unmoving. But the voices that once filled them with prayer had grown quiet. The wind swept softly across the plateau of Giza, brushing against the weathered stone, carrying the scent of change. The Nile still flowed, but its rhythm had faltered. The floods came too high, or not at all. Crops failed. Granaries emptied. Whispers of rebellion stirred in the villages. The divine voice of the pharaoh seemed far away. This was the beginning of the first intermediate period. A time not of monuments and kings, but of uncertainty and survival. It began around 2181 BCE, after the fall of the 6th dynasty. The central government at Memphis collapsed. Without the strong presence of a pharaoh, the many provinces of Egypt, the nomes, began to govern themselves. Local lords, called nomarchs, held power. Some were fair and wise. Others sought only control. The Nile, once Egypt's faithful provider, now became unpredictable. In some years it did not flood at all. The land cracked beneath the sun. The people starved. Famine spread across the Black Land. In tomb inscriptions and poetry, there are cries of despair. I am hungry and naked. The temples are silent. The dead are thrown into the river. Order is gone. Ma'at is lost. Yet in this time of sorrow, we also find resilience. Families gathered closer. Communities helped one another. In small towns, new leaders emerged, not pharaohs, but protectors. They reopened canals, restored shrines, and wrote poems of hope. One such place was the city of Heracleopolis, in Lower Egypt. From here, a line of local kings rose, calling themselves the 9th and 10th dynasties. They claimed to be the rightful rulers of all Egypt, though their power did not extend far beyond their city's walls. In the south, in Thebes, a rival house rose up. They were the kings of the 11th dynasty, beginning with Intef I, and followed by Mentuhotep I and II. These rulers were thoughtful, deeply religious, and determined to reunify the land. For more than a century, Egypt remained divided, the north ruled by Heracleopolis, the south by Thebes. There were battles, yes, but also diplomacy. Letters were exchanged. Marriages were arranged. And slowly, hope began to return. Meanwhile, ordinary people went on living. The tombs from this period are smaller, but more personal. In Beni Hassan and Asiat, scenes show people spinning thread, playing music, dancing, and preparing meals. There are family portraits. Love poems. Pet names. Stories about real people, not just kings and gods. This was a quieter Egypt, more human, more humble. The priests still told the stories of Osiris, the god who had been killed by his jealous brother Seth, cut into pieces, and brought back to life by his wife, Isis. Osiris ruled the afterlife now, and his tale became a powerful symbol in this dark time, the promise that even death could be undone, that even chaos could become order again. And then, around 2055 BCE, the tides truly shifted. Mentuhotep II, ruler of Thebes, launched a bold campaign to reunite Egypt. He marched north with his army, not just with weapons, but with symbols, with banners of the falcon god Horus and the feather of Ma'at. The people, weary of war and disorder, welcomed his rule. After a long and patient effort, Mentuhotep II succeeded. He defeated the northern kings. He declared himself uniters of the two lands. He wore the double crown. He restored the temples. He re-established the idea of divine kingship. And with him, Egypt was reborn. This marked the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, a time of balance, beauty, and deep reflection. But before we move forward, let us pause and remember, even in the quiet chapters of history, even in the troubled times when records are few and monuments crumble, the spirit of a people can endure.